because consumers stopped shopping. It collapsed because capital was extracted faster than it was reinvested. For decades, Sears dominated American retail. It owned prime real estate. It owned powerful brands. It generated steady cash flow. After a leveraged merger in 2005, financial strategy shifted. Assets were separated. Properties were spun off. Brands were monetized. Stores aged. Capital expenditure declined. E-commerce investment lagged. Debt increased. Revenue fell. In 2018, Sears filed for bankruptcy protection. The failure was not retail competition alone. It was financial engineering reducing strategic flexibility over time. Sears began operations in 1892 as a mail-order retail business serving American households. The company built its early advantage through nationwide catalog distribution. Railroad logistics allowed Sears to reach rural communities across the United States. Customers could order tools, clothing, appliances, and household goods through printed catalogs. This distribution model expanded retail access beyond traditional urban stores. By the early 20th century, Sears had become a dominant national retailer. The company gradually transitioned from catalog operations to physical department stores. Large-format Sears stores appeared in major American cities and suburban shopping centers. These stores combined appliances, clothing, hardware, and home goods under one roof. The model positioned Sears as a one-stop retail destination for middle-class consumers. Throughout the 20th century, Sears maintained a powerful retail presence. Its department stores anchored many American shopping malls. Consumers associated the brand with reliability and national scale. The company developed extensive supplier relationships across multiple industries. Sears also introduced private label products across numerous retail categories. These in-house brands increased margins and strengthened customer loyalty. The company invested heavily in national advertising and catalog distribution. Retail scale allowed Sears to negotiate favorable supplier terms. Operational efficiency reinforced the company's market dominance. By the 1970s, Sears was one of the largest retailers in the United States. Its revenue base reflected decades of expansion across physical retail networks. Department store traffic remained strong during this period. The company's physical footprint spanned hundreds of locations nationwide. Large suburban malls frequently relied on Sears as an anchor tenant. These stores drove consumer traffic to surrounding retail outlets. Sears, therefore, played a structural role in American mall economics. The brand became embedded in the architecture of post-war consumer retail. Appliances represented one of Sears' strongest product categories. Home tools and hardware also generated consistent revenue streams. Private label products such as Craftsman and Kenmore strengthened brand identity. These brands allowed Sears to control pricing and product positioning. Consumers often visited Sears specifically to purchase these proprietary goods. Retail margins therefore benefited from brand ownership. The company also maintained substantial inventory and logistics infrastructure. Distribution centers supported nationwide store replenishment. Centralized procurement reduced operational costs across the network. Store formats remained consistent across many regional markets. This uniformity reinforced brand recognition across the country. For decades, the model delivered predictable operating performance. Revenue growth was supported by real estate expansion and consumer demand. Sears, therefore, entered the late 20th century as a structurally dominant retailer. Its scale, brand portfolio, and store network created significant competitive advantages. These structural strengths would later influence how the company managed strategic change. Structural takeaway. Long periods of market dominance can conceal emerging structural vulnerabilities within large retail systems.
Sears accumulated a substantial portfolio of retail real estate over decades of expansion. Many stores occupied anchor positions within major American shopping malls. Anchor tenants typically received favorable long-term lease structures. In numerous locations, Sears owned the underlying real estate rather than leasing it. This ownership created a valuable portfolio of commercial property assets. Department store buildings often occupied large multi-level retail spaces. These properties were located in high-traffic suburban retail corridors. As mall development accelerated in the late 20th century, Sears expanded its property footprint. Real estate ownership gradually became a significant component of the company's balance sheet. The value of these properties appreciated as suburban retail expanded. Retail analysts increasingly viewed Sears as both a retailer and a real estate holder. The company also controlled several valuable consumer brands. Craftsman Tools represented one of the most recognized hardware brands in the United States. Kenmore Appliances maintained strong household brand recognition. Die-Hard Batteries held leading market share within automotive retail. These proprietary brands generated consistent revenue streams. Brand ownership allowed Sears to control distribution and pricing. Margins benefited from the absence of intermediary wholesalers. The brands also strengthened Sears' differentiation from competing retailers. In addition to stores and brands, Sears maintained a broad supply chain network. Distribution centers supported national inventory flows. Vendor relationships extended across appliances, apparel, tools, and home goods. These relationships reinforced the company's purchasing scale. Scale purchasing reduced procurement costs relative to smaller retailers. The retail network also provided nationwide consumer access to Sears brands. Store layouts often dedicated prominent space to proprietary products. This reinforced brand visibility inside the department store format. The combination of real estate ownership and brand control created structural assets. Financial analysts increasingly evaluated Sears through both retail and asset valuation lenses. Some investors believed the property portfolio alone held significant underlying value. This perception influenced future strategic discussions about asset utilization. Management faced growing interest in unlocking value from these holdings. Real estate analysts began estimating the potential standalone worth of Sears properties. Brand licensing opportunities also attracted financial attention. These factors gradually shifted strategic thinking toward asset monetization possibilities. Asset value discussions began to appear alongside retail performance analysis. The company's balance sheet therefore reflected both operating and asset-based considerations. Over time, this dual identity complicated strategic decision-making. Sears increasingly operated as both a retailer and an asset holder. This structural complexity would later shape major strategic decisions. Structural takeaway: when companies hold valuable assets alongside operating businesses, financial strategy can begin to prioritize asset value over operational reinvestment.
In 2005, Sears merged with Kmart to form Sears Holdings Corporation. The transaction was structured as a merger engineered by investor Edward Lampert. Lampert had gained control of Kmart after its earlier bankruptcy restructuring. Kmart emerged from bankruptcy in 2003 with a reduced store base and improved liquidity. The merger combined two large but struggling American retail chains. Sears contributed a nationally recognized brand and extensive real estate holdings. Kmart contributed a smaller discount retail network and available cash resources. The combined entity was structured under a holding company framework. Sears Holdings therefore operated as a portfolio of retail assets rather than a single integrated retailer. Lampert assumed the role of chairman and became the dominant strategic decision-maker. The investment thesis emphasized financial discipline and capital allocation control. Cost reduction was identified as a primary operational objective. The leadership team believed efficiency gains could stabilize retail performance. The merger also created a larger pool of physical retail locations. This expanded footprint increased total real estate exposure across the portfolio. analysts began evaluating the company's property holdings more closely. Real estate valuation became part of the investment narrative. The holding company structure allowed flexibility in managing these assets. Individual divisions within Sears Holdings were organized around business units. These units included retail formats, brand portfolios, and property holdings. Management introduced internal financial metrics for each operating division. This structure resembled a portfolio management model. Different divisions were expected to compete internally for capital allocation. Strategic planning therefore began to incorporate asset-level financial performance. Operating decisions increasingly referenced return on invested capital. Retail operations were evaluated through the lens of financial efficiency. At the same time, the broader retail industry was beginning to change. Consumer purchasing behavior gradually shifted toward digital platforms. E-commerce adoption accelerated during the mid-2000s. Competitors such as Walmart and Target continued investing in store modernization. Online retailers expanded product selection and logistics capability. These shifts created new competitive pressures within American retail. Sears Holdings entered this environment with a financially oriented strategy. Capital allocation decisions became central to the company's long-term direction. The merger therefore changed not only the ownership structure, but also strategic priorities. Financial discipline and asset valuation began shaping operational choices. Retail performance became increasingly linked to broader capital strategy. Over time, these priorities influenced investment decisions across the store network. The merger marked a turning point in how Sears approached its business model. Retail operations were now embedded within a financial holding structure. This change altered the balance between operational reinvestment and asset management. Structural takeaway: when operating businesses are managed within a financial holding structure, capital allocation priorities can gradually shift away from long-term operational investment.
Following the merger, Sears Holdings began evaluating how to separate asset value from retail operations. Management explored methods to unlock capital tied to real estate holdings. Many Sears locations were positioned on valuable commercial land. These properties had accumulated value through decades of suburban retail expansion. Analysts estimated that the property portfolio represented billions in underlying assets. The holding company structure allowed management to reorganize these assets. Strategic planning began considering property separation transactions. Certain real estate holdings were moved into specialized ownership entities. This approach allowed the company to monetize selected properties. Sale-leaseback transactions became one mechanism used in the process. Under this model, Sears sold real estate while continuing to operate stores in those locations. The transaction generated immediate capital for the company. However, the stores now carried long-term lease obligations. Lease payments replaced the previous benefit of property ownership. Financial reporting began reflecting these structural changes. Property assets that had once supported the retail balance sheet were gradually separated. The capital generated from these transactions was used for corporate financial purposes. Some of the proceeds were directed toward debt management. Other capital was used to support ongoing operating needs. Brand assets were also evaluated for monetization opportunities. Management examined licensing strategies for proprietary brands. Brand licensing could generate revenue streams independent of store operations. Over time, these strategies increased the financialization of the company structure. Retail operations remained in place, but the supporting assets were changing. Physical property ownership declined as transactions continued. The company therefore relied increasingly on lease agreements. Store-level profitability became more sensitive to operating performance. Real estate had previously provided a structural buffer within the business model. Once separated, that buffer became smaller.
The retail operation now carried higher fixed costs through lease obligations. Strategic focus therefore moved further toward asset efficiency. Investors continued analyzing the value of remaining property holdings. Corporate strategy meetings frequently evaluated potential asset transactions. Financial flexibility was prioritized within the holding structure. However, store investment requirements remained significant. Many retail locations required modernization and maintenance. Competitive retailers were upgrading store environments during this period. E-commerce infrastructure investments were also increasing across the industry. These competitive investments required sustained capital commitment. Within Sears Holdings, capital allocation increasingly balanced retail needs against financial strategy. Over time, asset separation reduced the resources directly supporting store operations. Structural takeaway: asset separation strategies can generate short-term liquidity while gradually weakening the operating resilience of the underlying business.
Retail department stores require continuous capital expenditure to maintain store environments. These investments typically include store renovations, merchandising updates, and technology upgrades. Competitors across the retail sector regularly reinvested in their store networks. Modern lighting, updated layouts, and improved customer flow became industry standards. Retailers also invested in inventory systems and logistics modernization. These investments supported efficiency and customer experience. Within Sears Holdings, capital allocation decisions increasingly reflected financial priorities. Management emphasized cost discipline across the organization. Capital expenditure levels gradually declined relative to earlier decades. Store renovation programs slowed across many Sears locations. Some stores continued operating with aging infrastructure. Lighting systems, flooring, and interior fixtures often remained unchanged for extended periods. Customers increasingly noticed the physical aging of store environments. Retail presentation gradually diverged from competitors that continued reinvesting. Inventory presentation also became less competitive in some locations. Merchandising updates occurred less frequently across departments. In parallel, capital allocation continued prioritizing financial restructuring initiatives. Operational budgets were tightly controlled across the store network. Store managers operated with constrained improvement resources. Some locations postponed planned renovation cycles. Deferred maintenance accumulated gradually across multiple regions. The department store format required scale and visual appeal to attract shoppers. As store environments aged, consumer perception began shifting. Competing retailers introduced brighter, more modern shopping spaces. Consumer expectations for retail experience continued rising. Retail environments increasingly integrated technology and digital interfaces. These changes required ongoing investment commitments. Sears Holdings faced increasing trade-offs between financial strategy and store investment. Reduced capital expenditure limited the company's ability to modernize locations. Operational performance became more sensitive to declining store traffic. Mall operators also invested in renovating shared retail environments. Anchor stores that failed to modernize sometimes reduced mall traffic overall. This created secondary pressure on underinvested retail locations. Store productivity therefore began diverging across the Sears network. Some locations maintained reasonable sales performance. Others experienced gradual declines in foot traffic. Revenue trends began reflecting these differences in store conditions. Retail competition intensified during the late 2000s. Department stores faced pressure from discount retailers and specialty chains. These competitors continued reinvesting in store formats. Within Sears Holdings, capital allocation decisions remained financially constrained. Operational reinvestment therefore lagged industry levels. Structural takeaway: sustained reductions in capital expenditure can gradually weaken the competitive position of physical retail networks. During the mid-2000s, digital commerce began reshaping global retail competition.
Online retail platforms expanded product availability beyond traditional store networks. Consumers increasingly compared prices and product selection through digital channels. Logistics infrastructure improvements accelerated the growth of e-commerce. Retailers began integrating physical stores with online fulfillment systems. Large competitors invested heavily in digital retail platforms. Amazon expanded its logistics and distribution capacity across the United States. Major retailers also developed integrated online ordering systems. Customers increasingly expected seamless transitions between online and in-store purchasing. Retailers invested in mobile platforms and digital payment systems. These changes required sustained technology investment. Supply chain systems also required modernization to support digital retail. Inventory management systems became increasingly data-driven. Real-time product availability became a competitive advantage. Retailers expanded distribution centers to support rapid shipping. Consumer expectations for delivery speed also increased. Two-day shipping became a standard service across many retailers. These industry changes reshaped the competitive environment for department stores. Traditional retailers needed to integrate digital channels with physical store networks. Successful retailers invested in omni-channel retail strategies. This included online ordering with in-store pickup options. Digital marketing also became central to retail customer acquisition. Search platforms and targeted advertising influenced consumer purchasing decisions. Retailers therefore increased investment in data analytics capabilities. Within Sears Holdings, digital investment remained relatively limited. The company launched online retail initiatives, but progress was gradual. Technology budgets remained constrained relative to major competitors. Store infrastructure also limited integration with digital fulfillment systems. Inventory systems lacked the flexibility required for advanced omni-channel retail. As competitors expanded digital capabilities, market expectations shifted. Customers increasingly used online platforms as primary shopping channels. Physical department stores faced declining foot traffic in many regions. Retailers that adapted quickly strengthened their competitive position. Retailers that delayed digital investment faced structural disadvantage. Sears Holdings experienced growing pressure from both discount retailers and online platforms. The company's digital retail capabilities lagged behind industry leaders. Operational strategy remained divided between retail modernization and financial priorities. This gap widened as e-commerce adoption accelerated during the late 2000s. Competitive pressure therefore intensified across the department store sector. Structural takeaway: failure to invest in digital retail infrastructure can create long-term competitive disadvantages as consumer behavior shifts towards online commerce.
As operational pressures increased, Sears Holdings relied more heavily on financial borrowing. Debt financing became a recurring component of the company's capital structure. Borrowed funds were used to support operating liquidity and corporate restructuring. Retail revenues during this period were becoming less stable across many locations. Lower store traffic reduced operating cash generation. Financial obligations, therefore, became more difficult to service through retail performance alone. Interest payments gradually consumed a larger share of available cash flow. Credit markets evaluated the company's financial position with increasing caution. Credit rating agencies began adjusting their assessments of Sears Holdings. Lower credit ratings increased borrowing costs for the company. Each refinancing round therefore required higher interest commitments. Debt obligations accumulated across multiple financial instruments. These included secured loans tied to specific assets. Some borrowings were supported by property and brand collateral. Other loans relied on broader corporate guarantees. The company therefore layered multiple financial claims onto its balance sheet.
Debt maturities required ongoing refinancing negotiations with lenders. These negotiations reflected investor concern about retail performance trends. Bond markets demanded higher yields to compensate for rising risk. The company therefore faced tightening financial flexibility. Liquidity management became a central executive priority. Cash flow forecasts were closely monitored by senior management. Operational budgets remained constrained as debt servicing obligations expanded. Some asset sales were used to generate funds for financial commitments. These transactions provided temporary liquidity relief. However, they also reduced the asset base supporting the company. Retail performance continued facing pressure from declining store traffic. Operating income became increasingly volatile. Financial markets observed these changes through quarterly filings. Debt disclosures highlighted the growing leverage within the company. Balance sheet complexity increased as financial instruments accumulated. The company therefore operated with rising financial leverage. High leverage reduced strategic flexibility during competitive pressure. Investment decisions increasingly required lender confidence. Management therefore balanced operational needs against creditor expectations. Financial strategy focused heavily on maintaining liquidity access. However, the underlying retail business continued weakening. Revenue volatility made long-term financial planning more difficult. Debt servicing obligations remained fixed regardless of retail performance. This structural tension intensified during the early 2010s. Retail decline and financial leverage began reinforcing each other. Structural takeaway: rising leverage can amplify operational weakness by converting declining revenue into escalating financial risk. By the early 2010s, Sears Holdings began experiencing sustained revenue compression. Department store traffic declined across many regions in the United States. Mall visitation patterns were shifting as consumer behavior evolved. Online shopping reduced reliance on traditional retail trips. Consumers increasingly purchased appliances and tools through digital channels. Apparel sales also migrated toward online retailers and specialty brands. Within Sears stores, foot traffic gradually decreased year after year. Lower traffic translated into reduced sales across multiple product categories. Appliance sales faced growing competition from home improvement chains. Apparel departments struggled against fast fashion retailers. Consumer electronics sales shifted toward specialized electronics retailers. Revenue declines therefore appeared across multiple retail segments. Quarterly filings began showing repeated year-over-year sales contraction. Comparable store sales trends reflected declining customer engagement. Some locations attempted promotional campaigns to stimulate traffic. Price discounting became more common within store operations. However, promotional activity reduced gross margins. Lower margins reduced the cash available for reinvestment. Retail operations therefore generated weaker financial performance. Store productivity varied significantly across the national network. Some locations maintained moderate customer traffic. Others experienced pronounced declines in sales activity. Regional mall traffic patterns influenced store performance. Retail corridors that lost anchor tenants experienced additional traffic declines. This created feedback effects within the mall ecosystem. Sears locations in declining malls often saw further revenue pressure. Lease obligations remained constant despite lower sales volumes. Operating costs therefore became harder to sustain. Inventory turnover also slowed in certain product categories. Slower inventory movement increased working capital requirements. Retail planning cycles became increasingly uncertain. Forecasting demand became more difficult amid declining traffic. Competitors continued investing in store experience and digital retail. This investment gap widened Sears's competitive disadvantage. Customer perception of the Sears brand gradually weakened. Brand relevance declined among younger consumers. Marketing budgets were constrained by financial priorities. Advertising visibility therefore declined relative to competitors. Reduced marketing further limited traffic recovery. Revenue compression became persistent rather than temporary. Management therefore faced declining sales alongside rising financial obligations. The company entered the mid-2010s with structural revenue pressure. Structural takeaway: persistent revenue compression can destabilize retail operations when fixed costs and financial obligations remain unchanged. By 2018, Sears Holdings faced mounting financial pressure across its operations. Years of declining revenue had reduced operating cash flow. Debt obligations remained significant across the corporate balance sheet. Liquidity concerns became central to executive discussions. Financial disclosures increasingly referenced short-term funding needs. Lenders and investors closely monitored the company's cash position. Management explored options to stabilize operations. Asset sales and restructuring efforts had provided temporary relief. However, operating performance continued weakening. Store closures accelerated across the national retail network. Many underperforming locations were gradually shut down. These closures reduced operating costs but also reduced total revenue. Remaining stores faced declining mall traffic in several regions. Retail performance therefore remained unstable. Credit markets evaluated the company's refinancing prospects cautiously. Access to new capital became increasingly difficult. Negotiations with lenders became more complex. The company therefore prepared for a formal restructuring process. Legal advisors were engaged to evaluate bankruptcy options. Chapter 11 restructuring became the most viable path forward. This process would allow the company to reorganize its obligations. On October 15, 2018, Sears Holdings filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The filing took place in the United States Bankruptcy Court. Court documents outlined the company's financial position. The restructuring process aimed to stabilize the remaining retail operations. Management continued operating stores during the proceedings. The bankruptcy framework allowed the company to renegotiate financial obligations. Creditors participated in negotiations over debt recovery. Store closure plans were incorporated into the restructuring strategy. Hundreds of additional stores were evaluated for closure. Employees across the retail network faced operational uncertainty. Suppliers monitored the company's payment capacity. Mall operators also assessed the implications for retail traffic. The bankruptcy process therefore affected multiple stakeholders. Real estate holdings remained central to restructuring discussions. Asset valuations influenced creditor negotiations. Brand portfolios were also evaluated for potential transactions. The court process established a framework for asset sales. Financial restructuring aimed to preserve portions of the business. However, the company's retail scale had already declined significantly. The bankruptcy filing marked a formal recognition of structural decline. Structural takeaway: bankruptcy often represents the formal recognition of structural deterioration that has accumulated over many years.
Wide aerial shot of an empty suburban shopping mall parking lot at dusk, with a large Sears anchor store darkened and quiet under cool blue-gray grading. Interior of a quiet bankruptcy court building corridor with polished floors and muted institutional lighting. Corporate conference room table with financial documents labeled Restructuring Plan under cool steel blue lighting. Interior of a large empty Sears department store floor with rows of unused shelves and dim overhead lighting. Closed Sears storefront inside a mall with metal security gate pulled down. Exterior shot of a Sears building with liquidation banners removed, leaving a faded sign on the facade.
Slow camera movement through a deserted department store aisle with aged retail fixtures. Mall management office overlooking an interior mall corridor with reduced foot traffic. Wide interior view of a shopping mall atrium where a former Sears entrance sits dark and vacant. Urban redevelopment planning meeting in a glass boardroom reviewing property redevelopment drawings. Architectural blueprints spread across a conference table showing redevelopment of large retail spaces. Construction crews inspecting the interior structure of a former Sears building under cool lighting. Commercial real estate investors studying a property portfolio report in a corporate office. Real estate portfolio map displayed on a large screen showing multiple former Sears locations. Corporate boardroom scene with executives reviewing brand portfolio strategy documents. Close view of a brand licensing agreement document placed on a polished conference table. Executive office scene where analysts evaluate brand value reports on a laptop. Institutional meeting room where creditors review restructuring proposals. Formal bankruptcy court hearing room with long wooden tables and legal files. Corporate restructuring team reviewing asset valuation reports in a modern office. Financial analysts studying spreadsheets and balance sheet documents on a large monitor. Commercial property investors walking through an empty Sears retail space evaluating the structure. Interior shot of a closed Sears entrance inside a mall with dim lighting and quiet corridors. Large mall corridor where temporary walls cover the former Sears entrance. Boardroom strategy meeting with executives reviewing store closure maps. Corporate office whiteboard showing a shrinking map of the Sears retail footprint. Retail strategy presentation displayed on a projector in a quiet executive conference room. Interior of a remaining Sears store operating with reduced customer traffic. Store manager walking through a sparsely populated department store floor. Quiet electronics department with minimal shoppers browsing shelves. Suburban mall interior showing several vacant storefronts surrounding the former Sears space. Retail industry report displayed on a laptop analyzing growth in online commerce. Distribution warehouse scene showing automated logistics systems used by modern retailers. Retail competitor storefront with bright modern lighting contrasting with older retail formats. Consumer using a smartphone to shop online while sitting in a modern home environment. Marketing analytics dashboard showing shifting consumer purchasing patterns. Former Sears storefront with faded signage and closed entrance under evening light. Empty department store escalator area with minimal lighting and quiet atmosphere. Commercial property redevelopment construction site where a former Sears building is being renovated. Real estate investors touring a redeveloped mixed-use retail complex. Boardroom presentation showing asset liquidation strategy diagrams. Corporate negotiation meeting between restructuring advisors and creditors. Stack of legal documents labeled asset sale agreement on a polished table. Night aerial shot of multiple closed retail anchor buildings across suburban malls. Wide interior shot of a former Sears floor converted into smaller retail units. Final slow aerial shot of a suburban mall where the former Sears building sits redeveloped within a changing retail landscape. Corporate collapse rarely occurs in a single moment. It typically reflects the interaction of multiple structural forces over time. The Sears case illustrates how financial strategy can reshape an operating business. Retail companies depend on continuous reinvestment in stores, logistics, and technology. Without sustained investment, physical retail environments gradually lose competitiveness. Customers respond quickly to changes in retail experience. When stores age, customer traffic often declines. Lower traffic then reduces revenue available for reinvestment. This dynamic can create a reinforcing cycle of decline. At Sears, capital allocation priorities increasingly favored financial restructuring. Asset monetization became a recurring strategic tool. Real estate separation generated short-term liquidity. Brand licensing created additional financial flexibility. However, these transactions also removed structural supports from the operating business. Real estate ownership had once stabilized the retail model. Property value provided collateral and long-term balance sheet strength. Once separated, retail operations faced greater financial exposure. Lease obligations replaced the benefits of property ownership. Operational flexibility therefore declined. Simultaneously, digital commerce transformed the competitive landscape. Retailers that invested in technology gained strategic advantage. Logistics efficiency became central to modern retail performance. Sears struggled to keep pace with these industry shifts. Capital expenditure reductions compounded the competitive gap. Stores aged while competitors modernized their retail environments. Consumer attention gradually migrated toward alternative retailers. Revenue compression followed declining store traffic. Debt obligations remained constant despite falling revenue. Financial leverage therefore amplified operational stress. Management faced increasingly constrained strategic options. Asset sales provided temporary relief but reduced long-term capacity. Each transaction narrowed the company's operating base. This pattern reflected a gradual structural weakening. Bankruptcy, therefore, became the formal endpoint of a long process. The collapse reflected years of interacting strategic choices. Financial engineering alone did not cause the outcome. Retail competition alone did not cause the outcome. The outcome emerged from the interaction of both forces. When reinvestment declines, competitive resilience weakens. When leverage rises, operational volatility increases. When both occur simultaneously, strategic flexibility disappears. The Sears case therefore illustrates a broader corporate pattern. Structural takeaway. Asset monetization without reinvestment weakens long-term resilience, and corporate collapse often occurs when financial structure meets competitive stress.